Hey guys, it's Tori and welcome to my vlog for the TBR Clear Out Readathon being hosted by Katie at Books and Things. I am very excited to be doing this. I'm really hoping it turns out to be a very successful reading month for me. I just desperately want to get back into reading, feeling like I'm reading a lot, and I really want, specifically this readathon because it's a TBR Clear Out, I really want to feel like I actually made a solid dent in my TBR, physical TBR. So that is our hope going into this. Hopefully it will work out that way. I'm so hoping. I'm planning to do a lot of like weekly planning every week, just being like, okay, when am I going to read? What am I going to try to get done without, you know, putting too much pressure on me to where I'm like finding that reading isn't fun because of the pressure I'm putting on myself. But I do want to kind of like set goals and make plans, more specific plans this month. I think that will be something. I think I'm in a mood where I'm ready to read. I just need a little more routine with it, I guess might be the word. So that is the goal. We're going to see how it goes. I really hope it goes well though, because I really want this to go well. I do have a couple things I need to reread, which will take up some of my time, but hopefully not too much. I'm on here now to tell you what I'm currently reading and pick up my prompt for the first book. If you missed my little TBR video, I have this mug full of prompts I made for myself to just add a little extra dimension to my TBR Clear Out experience. These are not the prompts that Katie from Books and Things created. They are my own prompts that I just feel like will help drive me a little bit more, and we'll just see how it goes. So first of all, let's talk briefly. I am in the middle of The Hobbit by JRR Tolkien. I intend to finish this in the next couple of days, so it will probably be the first book I finish this month. In fact, it definitely will be the first book I finish this month. I am currently rereading it for a podcast episode I do with my friend, so that is why I'm reading this. Enjoying it. I mentioned in my last vlog that it is probably my least favorite of the four main like Middle Earth books, this and then the 3 Lord of the Rings, or 2 main Middle Earth books if you wanted to count Lord of the Rings as one book as it was originally meant to be. But either way, I find that this is my least favorite of them, but I love Bilbo. He's one of my favorite characters in Middle Earth, so it's always great to visit him. And I'm just at the dragon scene, so I'm really excited to see the dragon and then the Battle of 5 Armies as we go along. So that is something I am currently working on. But I just finished earlier today my last book for the March readathon that I was participating in, her storyathon. So I need my next read. I probably won't start it today, but I'd like to at least know what it is. So let's pick from here. I have all my prompts. I should mention there are 2 in here that I did not mention in my TBR video, and it was because I found them on the floor of my room. They had somehow fallen out of the cup or never gotten in there. I had written them and set them aside and didn't get them in the mug before I did that video. So if you see one that you're like, I know that for a fact was not in that TBR video, that's why. So my first prompt is going to be highly anticipated. Ooh, okay, so if you missed my TBR video, this one is one where it could be a 5-star prediction, or it could just be one that I really want to read and want to know what it's about. So I feel like I need to think, because I have a lot that could classify as this, but I want to make sure I do the right one. I think I'm feeling a fantasy book, but I can't, I'm having the hardest time deciding which one to do, because my first instinct was to do Shadows of Self by Brandon Sanderson, because I have recently reread the original trilogy of Mistborn. A couple months ago, I read The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson, which is part of the next series of books within the Mistborn bigger series, I guess. So it's the next one I want to read. But I did this thing with my TBR list that I shouldn't have done. I honestly should go back in and change it, because what I did was I have it so Shadows of Self is the only one on there of the 3, because I was like, well, technically, yes, the other 2 are on my TBR, but I can't actually read them until I read the other one. So it just felt like I could like not put those other sequels on there until I like had actually read the next book in the series and then like switch them out. But that just means that I'm not actually changing what my TBR list says. I'm like keeping it the same, just actually adding more pages because the next book afterwards is more pages. So that's one thing where I'm like, I want to read that, but it's not actually going to make a dent in my TBR right now. So I feel like I want to wait on that one. I also would like to start with something a little shorter so that I feel like I can get through it faster and get on to the next one. Okay, I think I've narrowed down to 3 that are calling my name right now that are, well, okay, one of them's kind of on the chunkier side, but I don't feel like it's gonna take me too long to read. That one is Arcanum Unbounded by Brandon Sanderson. So yeah, it looks chunky, but I have read a couple of things in this already, so really I would just be reading the things I haven't read yet. This whole back part is Edge Dancer. I have read this already. I have not read The Emperor's Soul yet, so that would be a longer one towards the beginning that I'd need to read. I've read The Hope of Elantris. I think that might actually be it. So this one's definitely going to be a chunkier read, but I feel like it will be worth it. I really do. Or if I didn't want to go the Brandon Sanderson route, or if I felt like this is too long for a starting point, I have 2 Greek myth retelling ones that I've really wanted to read. So the first is The Children of Jocasta by Natalie Haynes. I read 1,000 Ships last year by Natalie Haynes and really, really loved it. And I always have loved Antigone. She's one of my favorite figures within Greek mythology. And so I've really, really wanted to read this. So this is one I could potentially pick up. I also could go for Medea by Eilish Quinn. This is a recent release that is obviously about Medea, another figure in Greek mythology that I'm very interested in. And I'm very curious to see how a book about her is explored, because I feel like her story is awful. Like, frankly, not necessarily in what happened to her, although I can understand why she would be a heartbroken person over what she experiences, but then her response is very dramatic. If you don't know the story of Medea, it's understandable that she's vilified a lot. And so I'm very interested to see how this author dances that line between making her a more well-rounded person, but also not condoning her actions. So we'll see. Maybe it won't be done very well. I don't know, but I want to find out. So these 2, or probably Arcanum Unbounded, are what I'm going to go with. I think I'm going to ponder on it the rest of today, and I will do some montage clips and show you which one I pick at that point, because I really don't know. And I did just finish the last book I was reading, and I just need a little more time, I think, to process that and then move on. So I will come back to you at some point and let you know what I ended up picking. And hopefully I'll be able to read it pretty quick so I can, like I said, get through a good chunk of the TBR this month. So anyway, welcome to the vlog. All right, so it is a few days later on March 6th, and I decided to go with The Children of Jocasta by Natalie Haynes as my first read for this vlog. I decided I really didn't want something as long as Arcanum Unbounded right now. I wanted to start off with something shorter and also just take a little break from Sanderson so I don't overwhelm myself with Sanderson stuff and then get burnt out on it. So I'm taking a little break from Sanderson, reading this. I am less than halfway through, but this book's only like just under 300 pages, so I actually only have just under 200 pages left. I'm on page 114. So we're getting there, and I'm hoping I have a little bit of a long weekend ahead of me, so I'm really hoping to be able to finish this by Monday. If not sooner, but I do have kind of a lot going on this weekend. Not enough where I don't have any reading time, but I do have a pretty good chunk of my day today and tomorrow taken up by some religious things that I'm doing. And then Monday, I'll have most of the day probably to focus on reading, and editing is what I'll probably spend most of my time doing. But I do have a couple of car things that I intend to get done in the morning that day. So even though it's only like 170 pages that I have left to read, it will probably take me a couple of days to read this because of the fact that I have limited time. So anyway, what this book is actually about. This book follows the children of Jocasta and Jocasta herself within Greek legend, I guess. Not really mythology, it's more of a legend. If you don't recognize Jocasta as a name, she is the wife of Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus the King, and then we're also following the story of Antigone, both of which are told in plays by Sophocles and many other places, I'm sure. I think those are just the only real records that we have, the more fleshed out records that we have of those stories. So anyway, it's very interesting. The way we are approaching the story was very interesting, and it took me a second to figure out what was going on, but I was able to do it. I think it helped that I did have the background of knowing both of these stories, so I do think it's worth going into this having read both of those plays. At least Antigone, mostly because the names are changed a little bit in this, and you might be like, what is going on? You'd probably figure out pretty fast, I guess, that basically there are chapters that are in third person that are following Jocasta, and so we're following her from a third person perspective. And then there are chapters that are in first person that are from the perspective of Ismene, one of the daughters of Jocasta, but it's, like I said, in first person, and all of the children's names have been shortened. So she's called Izzy, Isy. There's also Annie, who is Antigone, and Pollen, who is Polynces, I think is his actual name. I can't remember. And Etio, who is Eteocles, I believe is the original name as well. Anyway, so you have to kind of have that background knowledge to know what the heck's going on with these other characters, at least figure it out sooner, which I guess now that I've just told you, you'll have enough background that you could read this if you wanted to go into it and not know what the legend is, so you're kind of surprised. A lot of people know the term Oedipus complex, so if you have any background with the term Oedipus, you may have an idea of what that part of the story at least is about. Maybe not Antigone, but at least the Oedipus Rex and Jocasta part of the story. But anyway, it's really, I'm really just falling in love with Natalie Haynes. This is the second book I've read by her. I read 1,000 Ships last year, and it was one of my favorites of the year. There's a good chance this is going to be one of my favorites. I just love her approach to these legendary mythological figures. I really don't know what it is. There's something about her writing that just draws me right in without pulling me out when it's too intense and flowery. And I love her characterization. Like, it sometimes starts off feeling like it's gonna be a little bit flat, but then the further you get in the story, the more you just like really fall in love with these characters. And even in 1,000 Ships, like, she was bouncing around in a ton of different characters' heads in their different stories, but you just very quickly found an interest in each of the characters, and I just thought it was so well done. And this is no different. I would say, because of the scale of 1,000 Ships, where it's jumping around in so many people's heads, and yet she's still able to create this world and these characters in such a vivid way, I feel like that's just a more masterful work and just really, really well done. This one, because of the more closed nature of it, there's some parts that feel like they drag a little bit because of how short it is. Those parts aren't very long, but there's certain moments where I'm like, okay, there's a lot of exposition and describing of certain places. It's not as intense as like a Victorian novel, but it's also not as engaging in the way it's done as a Victorian novel, I guess. Anyway, so it just ends up feeling like it drags a little bit in certain moments as I'm reading, but that also could just be me, because usually the beginning of a book I tend to struggle a bit more with. So now that I'm getting closer to the halfway point, and we just met a very key character, so I feel like we're just going to be taking off from here. And oh my gosh, it's already giving me certain feelings of just loving a certain relationship that's going on in this, but also, like, in the back of my mind, I know the reality of that situation, and then I just feel gross, which I think is like what you're supposed to feel. And Natalie Haynes is creating that so well in such a realistic way, and just helping you really see the tragedy behind the situation and not just the nastiness. I guess I'll just put it like that. Because it is gross and nasty, you also have this feeling of how sad it is because of how you're feeling beforehand. And so I'm really already super nervous for how the story all comes together at the end of this. One thing I don't love about the interpretation in this is I don't really like how Antigone is being portrayed. I think she's being very much dismissed at this point as a very frivolous and dramatic woman who only cares about herself and is very selfish, and I just don't, that doesn't compute with my perspective of Antigone as a character. So I don't like that, and it could fix itself with how her story goes. I would think maybe it would show something a little bit more sympathetic and make her out to be a little bit better than it's currently making her out to be, but I don't know, and right now I really don't like how she's being portrayed, unfortunately, so we'll see how that goes, but I am really enjoying myself with this. I did also want to very briefly mention that I have started Marie Antoinette by Antonia Fraser. This is a book that I am buddy reading with Melissa, who is one of my subscribers. I am further than this bookmark says I am, but not by very much. I'm listening to it on audiobook and she's flying through it, which I'm so happy, and I'm really not. I'm listening to it on audiobook. And well, first of all, I've lost a little bit of time that I used to have at work because there's a new rule that during certain times of the day, which is a huge chunk of when I'm there, we're not allowed to listen to anything, which is understandable just by nature of working in retail and being needed out on the floor and things. Like during open hours, basically, we're not allowed to be listening to things, which means there's only a couple hours in the morning where I can, and then if I close, then there's really not really any time at all on those days. So a little bit sad, and that is going to make it take me a little more time in this, unfortunately, but I am enjoying it. It's interesting getting to know Marie Antoinette. So far, I haven't been super intrigued by her as a person as far as like really connecting with her. I'm intrigued by this mostly from the perspective of how she's been looked at in history and common history as a very selfish and frivolous person, but Melissa said this, and I very much agree, this very much is pointing at her as being just kind of naive and yet still very caring. She's a very caring person. She's just also very young and sheltered and naive. Her education wasn't horrible. It was better than a lot of other people get. But for a royal, there was some limitations in her education, it seems like in part because of her lack of interest in some of it, but also it seems like people just didn't encourage her in the certain areas of learning. There are other areas where she really excelled, especially with languages. But anyway, yeah, so there's sort of this naivete and sweetness to her that I think it seems like just shows up in France at the wrong time, basically. And so I'm curious to see how the rest of this goes. I don't know how long she was in France before the French Revolution took place, so I don't know how old she was when all of that went down. I know she had a few kids, so there's that. But anyway, yeah, I'm really excited to continue with this and see how I end up feeling about her the more I know about her. So anyway, that's what I'm reading currently. I think I'm going to stop here and maybe get some montage-y clips going, and then I'll update you once I finish Children of Jocasta and I'm ready to move on to my next prompt for the month, which I hope will be just within the next few days. Fingers crossed. So it is a couple days later on Monday, and I did finally finish The Children of Jocasta by Natalie Haynes. I literally just finished it, so I'm still kind of processing how I feel, but ultimately I really loved this book. I think this is probably my favorite thing I've read this year besides like rereads. I loved exploring this story in a new way, these stories I guess, in a new way, and Natalie Haynes actually twisted the ending of each of the stories of Oedipus and Antigone in a way that I really appreciated. Well, maybe Antigone a little bit less so, but I will get into that in a minute. I think I'm going to actually just run through Cawpile and break down my feelings between all of those categories as I chat with you. So let me pull that up on my computer. Okay, so starting with the characters, I really enjoyed the characterization that was in this. I really loved Jocasta in particular. I thought she was really interesting. And then I liked Ismene. I really liked that she had some similarities to her mother, but she was definitely the most different from her and their father. But she also had kind of this quiet dignity that she shared with her mother, and I really loved that aspect. So as far as some of the other side characters, I liked Sophon, who was an added character. I did actually like the way Oedipus and Creon were explored. For the most part, I feel like Creon, by the end of my experience reading Antigone, I have a little bit more sympathy for him because I feel like he feels terrible about a lot of the decisions he makes. He's very remorseful, and it doesn't really explore that in this. I did not like Antigone's characterization very much at all. There were some aspects to it that I could appreciate as a different viewpoint of that character within Greek myth, but I personally just didn't really get along with her and with the portrayal of her. So I think I'm going to give characters an 8 because I, for the most part, really liked it, but I was disappointed enough by Antigone that I feel like I can't quite give it any higher than an 8. Atmosphere, I felt like the atmosphere was really good in this. It wasn't like standout. It wasn't like an atmosphere where I was like, yes, I'm just feeling this, but I did feel like the setting and everything and the sense of emotional place as far as where the characters were at and where the rest of the city of Thebes was at with the plague and other things going on, I felt like it was pretty well drawn. I think I'm going to give that an 8 as well. Maybe I'll do, should I do a 7 or an 8? I feel like it just wasn't super strong, but I also did not feel like it was bad. It just didn't stand out. I feel like for a book that maybe wasn't prioritizing atmosphere, it did atmosphere well enough. So I think I will give it an 8 as well. Writing, I love Natalie Haynes' writing. I think it's really good. It's not too flowery. It just pulls me right in. Even when we're in kind of more boring parts, I still find a lot of interest in the way she explores characters and their emotions. She really creates very well-rounded characters through her style of writing, as well as creating very real places with her writing. I'm kind of between an 8 and a 9 because I feel like even though I think she's really great at writing in this particular format and stuff, I don't necessarily feel like the writing itself, like specific sentences and stuff, really stood out to me. But I also feel like she deserves to be recognized for her skill as a writer. Like, I think she's able to create a work of art in such an amazing way. I think I will stick with an 8 on that as well. I just feel like it's maybe not quite on the level where it would be like a 9 or a 10 where I'm really engaged with the writing. Plot, this one's a little bit hard to go about because it's definitely more character driven than plot driven, but I did feel like the way, and especially because it's a retelling, it's like I went into this having an idea of what was going on, but I feel like the way she adjusted a lot of the plot points and stuff I really loved, especially when it came to Jocasta and Oedipus. I really loved that. Like I said, Antigone, I'm still not really sure how I feel about her plot line and where she ended up. In some ways I like it, and in other ways I would have been very interested to see it go a different way. So I think I'm going to give it a 9 because I feel like on the whole I really liked what she did with the story. There were just maybe some things that maybe I would have preferred a slightly different way, but it wasn't necessarily like I was super upset by it or disappointed in Natalie Haynes' decisions. So we'll go with 9 since I was just mildly disappointed by it. Intrigue, I'm going with a 9 because for what this story is, I think the intrigue lies in wanting to see where Natalie Haynes takes this story, and as I got to know the characters, I wanted to know more and more how Natalie Haynes was going to wrap things up and bring things together. And I feel like sometimes in Greek myth there's this issue where you create these very realistic feeling, well-rounded characters, and then they end up doing things that are super dramatic, that are in the Greek myth, but they seem way over the top for what these characters actually have been created to be within this particular book. And so it's always interesting to see how authors balance the chaos with the more realistic portrayal of characters. characters. And I feel like Natalie Haynes did really well with it. So I think on that I'm going to give it a 9 as well, because I do feel like my intrigue was pretty high throughout the vast majority of the story. Logic, I think for within the world that we're in, I felt like she really added a lot of interesting realistic logic to this story that has a lot of mythological elements. And she does so without being totally dismissive of religion, which I really appreciate. There's maybe one thing, even though I really liked the way Jocasta's story ends, there was an element to it that I was like, well, it seems a little bit drastic, but also for the character herself, it kind of makes sense because she could be a little bit hot-headed in certain ways where she kind of makes really dramatic choices or does really dramatic things when she has a lot of heightened emotion involved. So it wasn't like it was totally outside the realm of possibility. There was just maybe a little bit of a feeling about it that was like, okay, I feel like that was really over the top. But I think on the whole, it was pretty well done. So I'm gonna give that a 9 as well. And enjoyment, I'm going to give a 10 because I really, really enjoyed myself, loved reading this book, thought it was great. So I think, yeah, that's where I'm going to land. That brings us to a 4.5 stars or a 4-star if we're doing on Goodreads. I feel like Copile and the way it's organized, I just barely started using it. I didn't used to, but I feel like sometimes with some of these books, I end up being like, that just seems too low. Like it's very particular about 5 stars. Like it's really hard to get a 5-star read in Copile. Like I've had a few books where I'm like, no, I'm giving this a 5-star. And so I kind of adjust some ratings just so I could get it to a 5-star rating. In this case, I'm not going to do that because I feel like what I've given it is, in all honesty, what I feel like it's deserving in each category. However, I think on Goodreads I will still put it at a 5 stars, even though it's technically in the 4-star range, because it's seriously just under the 5-star, and I know it's going to be on my favorites of the year. So I think I'm just gonna go for that. Ultimately, it was great. I'm so glad I read it, and now I have one less book on my physical TBR, so that is the first one for this month done. Let's pick my next prompt so that we can find out what the next read is going to be. So I'm picking this one, and it is a recent release. So I need to think of what I possibly could read for this. Okay, so I think I'm going to go with my book of the month pick for this month, and that is Dragonfruit by Makiia Lucier. This is a YA novel that has to do with dragons and Polynesian culture. I believe that's all I know, but it sounds super interesting. And because it's a YA book, it has nice large font and is not a lot of pages, so I feel like it's one I'm going to be able to go through fast, and it's probably going to be more pacey than a lot of other books I have on my TBR right now that are more recent releases that I could read. So I feel like this is just a good one to pick to get through fast, and then hopefully we'll be able to pick another book pretty fast. So that is that. For the rest of the day, I don't know. I probably will read some. I will at least start this. It might be a little later because often when I finish a book, it's hard for me to just jump into the next one immediately. Like I need a little bit of time to think, and especially since I've been sitting here for like an hour, hour and a half reading, I just feel like I need some time to just release my mind and my tension, move around a little bit. So I'm going to do that, and then in a couple hours I actually have to leave to go get some treats for an activity for my church that I am leading tonight. We're learning about family history and I get to teach it. So I'm honestly super nervous about it. Well, okay, I'm nervous about it, but it's more like anticipatory anxiety. Like I have taught things before, I've given talks and whatever, but it's been a while, first of all. Second of all, I'm not really that great at family history. It's just something I know some basics about, and so I'm teaching basics about it. And I really don't super want to do it. It's kind of just a requirement of me right now, long story short, just because it is, which is totally fine. It's just, yeah, it's hard for me to be super excited about it. I'm more stressed than anything and just want it to be over. So I feel like I also in the next couple of hours won't be able to focus on anything else except for my anxiety about having to do this. So I feel like I just need to call it on reading and just focus on some other things over the next couple hours. So I'll go do that. It should only be like an hour. I'm doing it at 7 o'clock tonight. And then afterwards though, I very likely will be able to read some of this. So we'll see what happens. I do have to get up pretty early for work tomorrow, so I won't be able to stay up terribly late. Anyway, so that's the plan. That's where I'm at right now, and I will just check in with you later once I have gotten a chunk of the way into this, or potentially finished, just depending on how life goes, I guess. Hey guys, so it is April 13th, and I have completed Dragonfruit by Makiia Lucier. I ended up really enjoying this. So first of all, I'm going to start off giving you a little bit of a better idea of what this book is actually about. In this book, we follow Natalie, who is a young girl who clearly has lived a life of just survival being the main component, just trying to survive in order to get back to her homeland, which she has been banished from. And in order to do that, she is studying sea dragons while also keeping an eye out for dragon eggs called Dragonfruit, which are able to grant wishes, but those wishes always come with a price. And I think that's all I'm going to tell you about to avoid giving too much away. This book really is an experience. It really does a great job of showing, not telling, although there are some aspects to it which I'll address in a moment that kind of felt like the author was forcing it to show and not tell, and just very like, no, you cannot tell, and it made the plot feel a little weird at some points. But on the whole, it was really magical and fun and whimsical. It is a standalone YA fantasy read, which doesn't often come around, and so it's a lot of fun. I think if this ended up being a series, it would probably be more of a companion series where you don't necessarily need to read the rest, because this is definitely a story all on its own, but there is a door open to have more adventures with these characters in future potentially. I don't know necessarily that that's going to happen, but it could. It's a possibility. But on the whole, I really enjoyed this. I don't know, I mean, I gotta put it through Call Pile, but if I were to guess, I don't think it's going to hit 4 stars, because I think there were enough things that I was not necessarily super impressed by. But on the whole, I really enjoyed myself reading this. So we'll see what this turns out to be. Let's start with the characters. I really liked the characters a lot. I liked Natalie as a main character. I thought she was really interesting. I loved the relationships between the characters. I really liked our other main character, Sam. I liked him, and I really liked, is it Rosamie, I believe was her name? She was a really fascinating character. She's basically kind of like the mean girl who like is a lady who wants to marry the prince, but this prince has been friends with Natalie for a long time, and so there's that relationship there, and so Natalie is kind of getting in the way of that relationship. And so it starts off with that, but then it kind of transitions into this friendship between them, and I really liked how that was done. I thought that was really beautiful and just a nice refreshing take on a character trope that's been done a lot. So I really liked those aspects. There were a couple times where I feel like the author was just forcing the characters to be a certain way in a given moment just in order to create certain scenes and certain plot points. So I feel like sometimes the characterization was set aside in favor of forcing the characters into specific positions, which I didn't particularly love. I also would have liked to see a little bit more well-roundedness with the queen in this book. I just feel like she could have been a really interesting character, but she was definitely one that I feel like was maneuvered to be just the type of person that the plot needed her to be, and I didn't really love that. So I think I'm going to give it an 8, because I do feel like on the whole I really enjoyed the characters. I just feel like there were those couple moments where I was like, I feel like the characterization is suffering in favor of the author having control over the story that just doesn't feel very natural. So for atmosphere, I think I'm going to give it a 9. I really loved the atmosphere. I feel like the writing, which I'll get to more in a second, kind of made it so it didn't completely consume me, but it was really close. Like, I really loved the island setting and the Pacific Islander cultures that were explored. I really loved that. I mean, this cover really says it all. Like, it had this atmosphere, this tropical, fun, magical atmosphere, and I loved it. So I'm going to give that a 9 because I just thought it was amazing. There was some slight things in the writing that kind of took me out of the atmosphere and didn't let it completely consume me, but on the whole, I thought it was really great. So going into writing, I feel like the writing was good, but not amazing. There were definitely some lines that I felt like were a little cringy the way they were written, like they were just trying to be this wonderful type of language and stuff, and it just didn't quite translate very very well in a natural way, and that kind of took me out of the story a little bit. So I'm going to say on that, we're going to give it a 6 on the writing. Good, but there was definitely some moments where it actually kind of irritated me, some of her, and like her repetition. And I mentioned earlier, she had this need to like show everything and not tell us anything. We just had to like experience everything to an extreme level. Like there were things where like the way the book starts, it feels like it just started and we went through these couple chapters of her going through these experiences with certain people just so we could see her relationship with these figures and stuff, but it was done in a way that just made the plot feel really choppy. Yeah, I feel like the writing was decent. It wasn't necessarily bad, but I just feel like there were aspects to it that pulled me out of the story. Plot, I'm going to give a 7. I thought the plot was really fun and interesting. I just think because of the way it was written and the like forcing everything to be shown, not told, it just ended up feeling kind of choppy at places, and like certain parts seemed like they dragged a little bit, and then all of a sudden we like cut through these things really fast. There was also a couple of moments I mentioned earlier too with characterization that I feel like some characters were just like forced into being in a certain position just so the author could have certain plot points happen. And there was one plot point in particular that I just basically where they're having to go on this really important quest and they bring certain people along for like no reason, just to like have them there so that they can have these certain relationships. But it just really made no sense to me why they were even there. So there were just like little things with that were just really strange. So yeah, 7. Intrigue, I'm going to give an 8. I was really engaged and really wanting to know what was going to happen, really entertained by that. And I honestly probably could have finished it even faster if I wasn't dealing with other things in my life that slowed me down a little bit this week. But I could have read this in one sitting, like if I had had the chance to. So definitely could. The intrigue was very much there. As for logic, I'm going to give that I think I'm going to give it a 6. Mostly because of things I've already talked about, like characters acting in certain ways just for the sake of the plot and for the author to force them into it. So it didn't feel very natural. And then yeah, that big thing just really bothered me that they were like, yeah, let's bring these 2 characters along with us on this quest. And it was like, why? Like there's literally no reason for them to be there except for so the author can play with them and their relationships with the other characters. Like only reason that they're there. And then there were a couple other moments where I was like, I feel like this doesn't totally make sense for what people would actually do or what these characters I feel like would even do. So yeah, 6 on logic. Enjoyment, do I give it a 10? I might give it a 10 because even though it had all of these issues that I've mentioned, I was very entertained. I loved this. So I am going to give it a 10 because I feel like it deserves that, honestly. It's one of the most engaging books I've read in a while and I just loved it. So we're gonna give it a 10. And that pulls me right up, despite all of those 6s and 7s, it pulls me right up to right at a 4. I have had a 4-star year so much. I mean, I'm very lenient with a lot of books, probably a lot more lenient than a lot of other people are with ratings, but I don't really mind because if I'm enjoying myself, I'm just gonna say I'm enjoying myself. I'm not gonna be weird about it, you know? So anyway, 4 stars, that's what this ended up at, and I feel pretty good about that. It was really entertaining. Like I said, I'm so glad I was able to read it. This has really like Moana vibes. If you love Moana as a film, which actually I don't love Moana as a film, I don't have anything against it. I just don't love it as much as some other films, but I do like aspects of it and I like the atmosphere and the setting of it, and I feel like this one really feels that way. And so if you love Moana, you may really, really like this one. And I'm glad I read it, like I said. So there's that. Let's pick my next prompt right now and I'll see if I can at least start something else tonight. All right, what have we got here? Oh, a book of the month book. So I did just read a book of the month book, but I have several others. So let me go look at my shelves and I'll figure out what I'm feeling right now. Okay, so I think I'm going to read The Spectacular by Fiona Davis. This is a book I've had on my radar since long before it was even a book of the month pick. I had it on my radar at the beginning of last year when I was looking through pre-order options. I considered pre-ordering it and then decided not to, but I I've really wanted to read it since. I did like a first chapter really mini thing a while back, and I really liked the first chapter of this. It's also not terribly long, so hopefully that means I'll be able to finish it quickly and move on to yet another prompt so we can get through even more this month. But anyway, this follows the Radio City Rockettes, and specifically it follows one of the dancers during the 20s or 30s? Oh, 50s even. Anyway, one of the Radio City Rockettes during the 50s, and there is a bomb threat that comes up on the Radio City building. And in the first chapter, we actually see the main character when she's an old woman, and she has been invited to something and clearly has a trauma in her past, which if you've read the synopsis, you know it's probably this bomb threat that occurred, and it still really has had an impact on her and her mental health and stuff. So I'm very excited to read this. Hopefully I enjoy it, and I will get back to you with my thoughts on it either halfway through or at the end, depending on how fast I read it. So I will let you know when I'm ready to what my thoughts are. Hey guys, so it is currently the 21st of April, and I have finally finished. I actually finished 2 books. So first of all, I finished The Spectacular by Fiona Davis, and then I also finished Lady Susan by Jane Austen. Let me actually start with Lady Susan because it was a reread and it wasn't necessarily part of the TBR Clear Out project because of that, but I did want to mention that I did read it. I read it for my podcast. Like I said, it was a reread and I really enjoyed it. Ended up giving it 4 stars. I love Lady Susan as a character, and it's always fun to revisit Jane Austen's writing style, and it was just a nice, cozy revisit. I read it in literally a day, one sitting, and it was just great. So really loved that. And then yeah, like I said, I finished The Spectacular, and I really enjoyed this, like a lot. I mean, I enjoyed myself as I was reading it, and then just thinking about the story, I really loved a lot about this. So let me just go through Copile and we can discuss more in depth what I liked about this, what maybe some of my issues were, and see what the rating comes out to be. So I'm not sure how much I told you about this book when I started it, but basically the story followed a young woman who ends up joining the Radio City Rockettes in 1956, and it happens to be during a time where the Big Apple bomber was terrorizing the city, and she ends up coming face to face with this man. That's all I'm going to tell you. I think that's all you really need to know. But it was honestly just so good. So starting with characters, I really enjoyed the main character in this book. She was just very realistic and relatable to me. Like, she is clearly more of an extroverted type person, but she also clearly has some anxieties just about life, a lot of that coming from trauma she's experienced with her family, but she still has such a caring heart. And I also, outside of the main character, I really liked that the author really explored how complicated people really are. Like, we have kind of an abusive, manipulative father in this book who gaslights and treats the main character and her sister like their children, and is just not a very good person as far as all of that goes. But there's also this exploration of all of that is coming from his own trauma and fears, as well as his own expectations about what life should be, and that he's really coming from a place where he does care about his children and want to provide for them and protect them, but he's just not understanding that there's other ways to protect and help his children outside of like cocooning them and treating them like children and forcing them to do what he says. And then there were other characters as well that I really enjoyed. So I would say, especially for a book like this where it's a historical fiction that's maybe a little more commercially based rather than like a literary type book, I think the characterization was actually amazing, and so I'm going to give it 9. I don't feel like I fell in love with the characters to the same extent that I would expect a 10 to give me, but it was really close, and I really just found the exploration of these really complex individuals to be fascinating, and I really enjoyed that. Atmosphere, the story is set in New York City in the 1950s, and we're following the Radio City Rockettes, so we're following like dancers and kind of that showbiz sort of scene, and I really thought that it came to life pretty well. I would say it's not as good as the character development, so I think I'm going to give it an 8, but I did like the setting, and I felt like I was very much pulled into the story through the way that was described and played with and explored. So yes, that's what I'm going to give there. Writing, honestly, I enjoyed the writing. Again, for a book of this style, I felt like the writing was pretty good. There were one or two things I didn't love. There were a couple words that clearly the author really liked to use them, like maudlin, that was a big one that came up several times, that like it wasn't a ton throughout the book, but it was enough times and it's an unusual enough word that I was like, okay, yes, she just really likes this word. And then there were several times where the main character just randomly called her dad by his first name for like no reason, and not like to his face, just like in the narrative. It's a first person narrative and she like refers to the dad by his first name and we're not really given an explanation as to why. Like I never think about my dad by his first name unless I'm thinking about what other people refer to him as. So I just thought that was really, really odd. So yeah, a couple of writing things, but on the whole, I felt like it was pretty good. I'm going to give that an 8 as well because I feel like it was solid writing that didn't necessarily pull me out of the story. Things were well described. I felt like it was pretty good on the whole. So I don't want to give it a 7 because I feel like a 7 is where it gets to the point where there were active things that bothered me, but maybe not enough to like be lower than that. So anyway, I think I'm going to give it an 8 because I thought it was solid writing, but it wasn't like amazing standout. Plot, I really loved the plotting of this book actually. So we start off mostly focusing on her experience joining the Rockettes, what that's like for her, what her day-to-day life is, what her dealing with her family is like with that, and then we move relatively quickly into the bomber stuff, but also we're getting to know the characters. It was just a great balance between characterization and plot, which is what I really like, and I never felt bored at any point. I felt like it was consistently moving forward in a way that I was pretty engaged. So I feel like the plot was pretty good. I think I'm going to give it a 9 because it wasn't like the most exciting thing, but I think for what it was very well plotted. And I think, yeah, that the author just did a great job with that. Intrigue, I definitely had a lot of interest in knowing what was going to happen. I kept very engaged. Even though it's been like a week or so since I started this book, I probably could have finished it a lot faster. I just had other things in my life going on, like I often say. But really on the whole, like the last 150 pages I read within the last couple of hours, and just, I really, really liked it. So I think I'm going to give Intrigue, I think I'm going to give it, I'm debating between 8 and 9 because I really liked it, like I said, but I don't necessarily feel like I was ever really on the edge of my seat. Okay, maybe 1 or 2 times, but also part of the issue is I already know the story of the Big Apple bomber, and so this definitely took a lot of liberties. I don't want to suggest that this was very accurate to that experience because it definitely was not, but there were aspects to it that I was like, okay, I kind of know some of these things because I studied psychology in college, and this case, the Big Apple bomber, was what led to the beginnings of criminal profiling as a career within the psychiatry field. So I've been told about this case through that. So I had some level of understanding of what was going on, but at the same time, I was still pretty intrigued. So I feel like it kind of deserves a 9 because for what it was and the level of intrigue that was going to be in this book, I feel like it did a pretty good job. Like, I don't think it's the type of book that you're expecting it to be super heart-pounding or anything. So I don't want to rate it low because that will bring the whole rating down, and it doesn't deserve that because it's just not that type of book. Like, it's not meant to be super intense like a mystery or thriller, but it's also not like a fantasy where it has big dramatic things going on either. It's just a historical fiction that's primarily character driven with some plot elements thrown in. So I feel like on the intrigue, I'm going to say a 9 because I was really like, there literally was no time that I was bored during reading this, and I think that's because I was very intrigued by where it was going, where the characters were going, the plot, all of that jazz. So yeah, I think that's what I'm going to give there. Logic, this is where it's probably going to go down a little bit because honestly, like, logistically, a lot of the things that happen in this book with them trying to solve who the Big Apple bomber is and stuff would probably not really happen in real life. There's a few things that are a little bit far-fetched, particularly with the main character's involvement in it. Does it make for a great story? Yes, but logically there were definitely some things in it that I was like, this doesn't actually totally make logical sense in a real world setting. If this was like a fantasy book, that would be one thing, but it's not. It is a realistic book. So I think for logic, I'm going to give it a 7, because I don't want it to tear the main rating down, because I don't think that was the point of this book, to be totally logical. And it definitely didn't take me out of the story. Like, it was logical things that worked within the story, even if maybe in real life they wouldn't necessarily work. So I don't feel like it distracted from the story itself in any way. So I think 7 is a good place to go, where it's like, yes, there were issues, but it wasn't bad enough to disrupt the story itself. And then enjoyment, I'm literally just gonna go to a 10, because I genuinely, like, I don't even remember the last time I read a book like this type of historical fiction, that I really and thoroughly enjoyed this much. And I'm so glad, because I have had my eyes on this one for a very long time, since like over a year ago when I first heard of it coming out last year. I just thought it sounded really interesting, and so I was really hoping that I would enjoy it, and I ended up enjoying it a lot. I think I would love to read more by this author, because she writes a lot of other books. It sounds like from her author's note section, she talks about how all of her books are set in New York City during different decades and focus on different buildings in New York City. I don't know if I was misreading that, but that's what it sounded like, and that just sounds really interesting. And I think this one was so good that it's worth looking into more of her stuff. So anyway, I'm gonna put enjoyment at a 10, because genuinely, like, I really loved this. I think this is definitely my favorite new book probably that I've read this year. I don't know, maybe The Chosen would still beat it out, but it's really good. That's all I will say. And that brings us to 4.5. So it's matching Children of Jocasta. So between the books that I have read for the Clear Your TBR readathon, we have 3: The Children of Jocasta, Dragonfruit, and The Spectacular. Both Children of Jocasta and The Spectacular are at 4.5 stars, and Dragonfruit is at 4 stars. So it's technically the lowest, but it's been great. All 3 have been stellar. Now that I think about it, The Children of Jocasta might be above The Spectacular. I had forgotten that I had read that in this video as well. I think I would say I liked that one better, just because I think it reaches certain aspects of my reading personality that this one doesn't quite hit. This is a very specific part of my reading personality that is good, but it doesn't hit multiple notes, whereas Children of Jocasta did. So I think I would put, of those 3, Children of Jocasta first, then The Spectacular, then Dragonfruit, but all of them have been great. So I'm going to pick one more prompt. Potentially we'll do more, but I only have 9 days left in the month, and I've been reading kind of slow, and I really need to finish my audiobook for Marie Antoinette, which is also for the TBR Clear Out readathon. So I really need to try to focus on that, and maybe try to get one more done, and I just don't think I'll be able to do anymore. Maybe I'll pick one more prompt, but let's just pick one for the next one I'm going to read and see what that is. All right. Ooh, so a 5-star prediction. So this will be an interesting test, because so far I have read some amazing books in this video, and now I'm being asked to try to find one I think will also be actually even better. I feel like I need to look at my shelves to figure something out, because I can't think of anything right off the top of my head. Okay, so it's nighttime, my lighting's not great, and I don't really want to set anything up, but here's my shelves. And I could, when I think of a 5-star prediction, my first instinct is to go for a myth retelling. So there's like Makiia, which just recently came out, The Weaver and the Witch Queen, which is by Genevieve Gornichek, who I've read her debut novel, and it's one of my favorite books ever. So I could go for that one. But then I'm like, I did just do Children of Jocasta. Like, do I want to do another Greek myth retelling in this video, or myth retelling in this video in general? I'm not sure. So moving down here, we hit more of like my historical fiction and stuff, which I don't know, I could do. I feel like there's some that I really want to read, but I don't necessarily feel, ooh, those were my knees. I don't necessarily feel like I know I have confident feelings that any of them will be 5 stars. I don't know. Or I can just go and do some dark academia stuff. Like, part of me wants to try to do something a little shorter so that I could have more of a chance of finishing it in the next 9 days before this video is over. But also, I don't know. I just think that I could do all sorts of things. Like, I mean, I could do the miniaturist. This one's one that I've just had on my radar for so long that I don't really know if I'll love it, but like, I kind of just hope I do after all this time of wanting to read it. But also, I'm not like for sure that it would be a 5 star. So there's that, or there's Great Circle or The Four Winds. Great Circle I've just heard a lot of good things about, so I have a lot of hope that I'd really like it, but it's kind of a chunker. Kristen Hanna I have read before and have rated other books by her 5 stars, so I feel like I could probably like them. Or I could move down here and go for things more modern, like Glass Hotel. I loved Station 11, so I could enjoy Glass Hotel as well by the same author. Or Secret History, so many people love it. I may end up hating it, I don't know, but I feel like there's a good chance I'd enjoy it. And The Mountains Echoed, I mean, Khaled Hosseini, I know one book I've read by him I loved, and I know he's just well acclaimed. So like, there's so many options, I don't even know what to do. Okay, I think I'm gonna turn off the camera and just like do some deep thinking, and I will come back to you once I've decided what I'm going to read. Okay, so after staring at my shelves, I still don't know what I want to read. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a double prompt thing where I'm going to pick another prompt and see what will match both prompts, both the 5-star prediction and whatever else I pull out. Because the thing is, because I've enjoyed what I've read so far this month, I'm just expecting to enjoy everything, and so I feel like most of the things I have on my TBR are 5-star predictions right now, and it's kind of in some ways a little overwhelming. So yeah, let's pick out a second prompt and see what we can do with the double prompt. All right, so I picked intimidating. Okay, so this narrows things down a lot. Let me think for a second. I have a couple in mind. Let me look at my shelves again and I will let you know in just a second what I end up picking. All right, I was debating between a couple things, but I think I've landed on one that I am excited to read. I probably will not finish it in this video, but we'll see how far I'm able to get in the last 9 days of the month. But that is When Christ and His Saints Slept by Sharon K. Penman. I have read The Sun and Splendor by Sharon K. Penman, which is about Richard III and the Wars of the Roses, and loved it. It's one of my favorite books of all time, which is why I think there's a potential for this one to be 5 stars as well. It is over 700 pages, so, and like the font is not large, it's very small, and there's, yeah, the pages are very thin, so this book kind of looks like it's maybe not, I mean, it looks pretty thick, but over 700 pages, almost 800 pages, that wouldn't be my guess, but it is. So chances, like I said, are I will not finish it in the next 9 days, but we'll see how far I'm able to get, and hopefully I'll just be able to fall into it and enjoy it quite a bit. So we'll just see how that goes. I definitely will finish Marie Antoinette by the end of the month, and who knows, maybe I'll just get sucked into this and find time and be able to read all of it. Like I said, I seriously doubt it, but it's possible. So that's the book I'm going to be reading next. Specifically, I didn't even tell you what this is about. This is about Eleanor of Aquitaine, so we'll see, like I said, how that goes. And I think that's the end of this clip. So I will see you probably at the end of the month when I've finished Marie Antoinette, hopefully, and then when I have thoughts on When Christ and His Saints Slept. Hey guys, so it is actually into May now that I'm finally coming to you with this final clip of this vlog. I just, honestly, I kept meaning to do this little clip and just kept not doing it. That's really all that happened, but I wanted to do this before I actually obviously finish editing this vlog and post it within the next week or so. So I did not even sort of finish When Christ and His Saints Slept. I have gotten like 66 pages in, so not very far in the grand scheme of things, but I already can tell you I'm really enjoying this, and with it being a 5-star prediction, I definitely feel like there's still an option for it to be a 5-star read for me. I think in the last clip I said something about it being about Eleanor of Aquitaine. It actually is a little bit before Eleanor of Aquitaine, following Maud, the daughter of Henry I, I believe, as after the White Ship disaster, if you know anything about that. In fact, the first chapter is focused on the White Ship disaster. So that is what we're focusing on in this book. And like I said, I'm really enjoying it. I just love Sharon K. Penman's ability to bring to life historical figures and historical worlds in such an incredible, really immersive way. Like, I just feel like the characters she creates are so well-rounded. She tells the story in such a way where she's jumping into different perspectives in a way that helps build up the characters in different ways, whether we're looking at them through someone else's eyes or through their own eyes or through just someone of a different class or someone of their same class. Like, we're seeing these people from a bunch of different perspectives, and I feel like that just really lends itself to feeling like we're getting to know these people and also the world and culture and situation they're being born into or experiencing on a deeper level, because especially in these more political based historical settings where it's like we're following royalty, there's so much that influences how they're living their life because of the decisions they have to make and the decisions made by others that of course really have a significant impact on their experience and their way of life. And I just feel like Sharon K. Penman just brings that to life amazingly. So I'm really enjoying this. I really hope I can get myself back in the reading game. The past week or so I've been slacking a little bit, mostly just because I've had other things I've needed to attend to with life and stuff. So hopefully now that we're past that a little bit, I'll be able to really dive into this. I'd love to finish this within the first half of the month so that in the second half of May I can focus on some other things, but we'll just have to see. It is a pretty long book, but I will be able to listen to some audiobooks throughout the month of May because I did finish Marie Antoinette: The Journey by Antonia Fraser. I have not talked to Melissa yet, who I was reading this with, so I definitely need to send a Voxer message to her to finish up my thoughts. I ended up finishing this faster than I actually ended up thinking. I wanted it done by the end of the month, but it got to a point where I was like, oh, I'm probably not going to be able to do it. Like, I don't think it's going to work out. But then it did. I was able to finish, I think, just like a day or two into May, so not too bad at all. I did already put it through Cawpile, so I'll just briefly go through my thoughts on that. Obviously, it's a nonfiction, so I had to interpret Cawpile in a slightly different way, but we worked with it. So characters, this is a biography, so that's easy enough, just exploring how well-rounded and well explored the historical figures in this were. I ended up giving it an 8 because I felt like it was pretty good. I felt like it explored a lot of different ideas of Marie Antoinette and people related to her. Atmosphere, I gave a 7. I don't feel like there was like no atmosphere. I definitely feel like Antonia Fraser has great skill in writing nonfiction. I just don't feel like it was an atmosphere that pulled me in a way that stood out to me. So 7 is pretty like above average, but not, I mean, it's nonfiction, so pretty good, but like not stand out for sure. Writing, I gave an 8. I thought it was really good. There were definitely some aspects that I just wasn't pulled into the writing. It just didn't draw me in as much. That could be just where my mental place was while I was listening to this, but I feel like I've enjoyed other nonfiction audiobooks that have had writing that really have absorbed me, and I just didn't feel like this quite hit that, but it also was pretty good. Like I said, Antonia Fraser has a really great skill with nonfiction, with bringing it to life, and helping you really feel connected to the people and events she's talking about. Plot, I kind of put this in the perspective of how the events of history were approached and sequentially how it was done. And I feel like she did a really great job of really focusing in on these little moments that led to Marie Antoinette's ultimate fate, of course, in the French Revolution, while also not making you feel like she's constantly pointing to the doom that's at the end of her life. She's just telling the story of this woman's life, and I felt like she did a really great job with that. So as far as like a nonfiction biography experience, I felt like it was well plotted. Like, we were able to explore the lead up and just really treat her as a person who lived a full life, not just someone who happened to die in this really tragic way. So I appreciated that. Intrigue, I gave an 8 as well. Similar reasons. I felt like I was engaged with this. There were definitely some moments where I wasn't as engaged with it. It just didn't grasp my attention and heart the way I would hope it would. average that maybe a 9 or a 10 on intrigue would suggest, but I feel like I still was very interested in finding out where everything was leading and really enjoyed the process. Like, I wasn't dismissive of anything at any point. Logic 9, I feel like the way she explored history and her opinions even, I feel like she did a really good job of making well-informed guesses on what potentially could have happened with things that we don't know, while also acknowledging that we don't know, and that's something I really appreciate. There were maybe a couple things where I was like, I feel like there's a lot of opinion in this and it's not treating it as opinion, and there's definitely a slant to the narrative towards really treating Marie Antoinette as the victim in a lot of this, and there's not as much recognition of, you know, she still had her role to play and wasn't perfect. Not that Antonia Fraser necessarily says she's perfect. In fact, at the end she does bring up some things that were issues. I just feel like in the narrative of the story that wasn't explored as much as I would have liked. It was really just kind of discussed more at the end, I think. And then enjoyment, I gave a 7. I just feel like overall it was really good. It was a solid nonfiction read, great experience. I'm glad I got through it, and I have a lot more respect and interest in Marie Antoinette than I did before, but I don't know how well it's going to stick with me. It didn't necessarily stand out in any particular way alongside other nonfiction I've read. It was just like a solid, good read. I'm glad I read it. That is how I felt about that book. I'm so glad I finally got to it. And that's the end of this vlog, I guess. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know down below if you read any of the books I've mentioned in this video, your thoughts on them. Let me know what you read in the month of April, how that went for you, if you have any new favorites. I would love to hear. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope you are having a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye!